Welcome to the Mindset Game podcast. I'm Verit Kogan, and I'm absolutely thrilled to introduce Justine Froelker to you today. Justine is a licensed professional counselor with over 20 years of experience in traditional mental health and personal development. She has been certified in the work of Dr. Brene Brown and is the author of 9 books, including 5 Amazon bestsellers, covering subjects such as infertility, faith, and grief. She has been honored to do 2 awesome TEDx talks, The Permission of the and The Donut Effect. And she travels nationally and presents virtually to global audiences, delivering keynotes, workshops, and trainings on topics such as leadership, resilience, and courageous and curious conversations, which is our focus for today's episode. And I got to connect with Justine through an organization called Vistage Worldwide, where we're both speakers. And one kind of cool, really interesting fact, unique fact that I've learned about Justine is that for 4 months of the year, she and her husband care for hundreds of monarch butterflies, which is just so cool. So, welcome, Justine. So excited to
Thank
have you
you.
here.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you.
So, I mean, I got to say, my first question is tell me more about the butterflies. Like, what is that
I
about?
know. It's the weirdest and coolest hobby ever. And so my husband and I went through an infertility journey. We're 10 years out. And so we had to dig our way out of the deep, dark hole of grief. And that's actually how I found the work of Dr. Brene Brown, but it's also how we started this hobby together because especially I'm a licensed professional counselor. So I know the statistics. Couples who have hobbies together are happier, especially when they learn those hobbies together, like versus like one teaching a hobby to someone else. Like that doesn't usually work. And so like we are in St. Louis, Missouri, which is on the Monarch Highway of their migration. And so we planted milkweed, which is the host plant for the monarch caterpillar. And the monarchs they've been endangered for a while. And so I think we're probably on our 6th summer of doing it, maybe 7th. And so mostly me, but Chad will help, especially when I'm traveling. But I bring in the eggs or the caterpillars inside and raise them until they emerge as their butterflies, and then I let them go because the statistics are pretty wild. A monarch butterfly or caterpillar in the wild really has terrible odds. Really, only about like 1 to 5 out of 100 actually make it, just because there's a lot of natural predators, but also us being their biggest predator. And so when I bring them in, their odds go up quite a bit because they're not exposed to pesticides, chemicals, but also like stink bugs and wasps and things like that. And so it is like the weirdest hobby ever. And I do swallowtails too. Like we have a bunch of swallowtail host plants this year. We have a new species of swallowtails, pipevine swallowtails, and some of them might literally stay in their chrysalis for 2 years with us. Like it's a wild hobby, but like for me, the butterflies, they're just really, really resilient, and they have a lesson for us in resilience in their journey. And so I've written a couple children's books on it because that's just how powerful the kind of metaphor is for me. So it is a really weird and cool hobby. And I always tell people, like, especially when COVID first hit, I was like, oh my gosh, all these people are trying to like educate their kids at home. I was like, I could teach butterfly classes. So I put 4 classes on YouTube. I was like, I could not curse for an elementary school age class. Like I could do that. And so I was like, okay, you need a lesson on butterflies. And so occasionally like my hometown they'll bring me in and I'll read my book over Zoom for them. And like the first grade teacher will always text me. She goes, is this containment good enough? I'm like, no, that's not big enough. Get her to a bigger containment. Like, or you're going to be explaining death to your students. Like, so
And
it is a wild hobby, but I love it. It's just part of, I don't know, this work and living what I call this courageous life is really having awe and wonder and childlike joy. And for us, that's like in our flowers, our wildflowers, the butterflies and stuff like that.
mm, well, let me ask you a question because I think it's really cool how you kind of given us a couple of little lessons, right, around resilience that we can learn from butterflies, and around just how life can be really difficult, yes, like for these
Yeah.
butterflies. And so I'm curious about if you were to kind of take those lessons that you've learned and apply them now to the context of this conversation around courage and conversations and being our true self and resilient. What is all that, how does that all fit in together?
Yeah. There's this element that it's so easy to forget that we're all just trying to figure out how to navigate life in this world. And I think we forget that we do it best in a healthiest way when we walk one another through it. And but that requires us to show up as our full selves. That requires us to stay curious. That requires us to remember that we have way more in common than we don't, despite what the world is telling us. To remember one another's humanity, and because that's how we will be able to choose resilience and connect with one another and walk with people. Because at the end of the day, we all just want to feel seen, known, and loved. Even though the world is kind of, I don't know. I always tell people the world is telling us that we should hate each other and that we have nothing in common, and we actually have way more in common than we don't. We just have forgotten how to, or we're out of practice of how to sit beside people, especially people who look different, think different, and believe different than us, and seek to understand them. That doesn't mean that you agree with everything. It just means that you do the work to stay curious and seek to understand them.
So tell us a little bit more about that, kind of this concept of being curious and, doing our best to understand others. Because when there's tension, especially if there's kind of, right, some distress in a relationship, or we have certain beliefs or judgments about people, especially if we've been hurt, it can be really hard to be in a place of curiosity and acceptance. And so how do we do it?
Yeah. Well, it's really important for us to remember, we're really tired and burnt out, and there's just a heck of a lot of trauma, right? And everyone has some, even if they're not calling it that. And so when things are hard and emotions have us, it's going to be really difficult to choose curiosity. It'll be really difficult to choose the courage skill set when emotions have us. But then on top of that, we also have to remember that we have this brain that is literally wired to keep us safe. It is wired to keep us comfortable. It does not like vulnerability. It is judgy. You have to actively stay out of judgment, because our brain is wired for safety. Good guys, bad guys, safe, unsafe, binary world, even though there's hardly nothing that is just all good or all bad, black, white, right? It's just not two categories. And so we're fighting against, not fighting against, we have these emotions that we have to be able to rumble with. We have to be able to name our emotions accurately, appropriately, which most of us were not taught how to do that growing up. We don't have the language or the skill set of how to name them, let alone cope with them in a healthy way and allow them to move through. But then we also have to challenge kind of the safety that our brain is wired for, right? Because connection's only made through vulnerability, and yet we have the emotions running the show and our brain that wants to keep us safe. So you have to actively choose the curiosity. And so it's almost kind of, for me, it's almost twofold. It's that I want to stay with curious language towards myself, towards others. And I have to deal with my own stuff. I have to deal with my old hurts, my own traumas. What's this really about? What's this bringing up for me? Am I tired and hungry? And it's really just that, right? How often are we really struggling with having a tough conversation with someone we love or we work with? And it's you just need a freaking nap, or to get a snack or to take a deep breath. There's this element that we have to remember, that we are these messy humans in a broken world. I don't believe people are broken. I believe the world's pretty broken, but we're just messy. And so we have to be able to navigate our emotions and choose curiosity, actively choosing it, even though our brain is not necessarily wired for it. And so It is being able to recognize when emotions have us and then get our thinking brains back online by like paying attention, taking a deep breath, being like giving ourselves permission to feel it, to pause, to ask for what we want and need in a clear way, to use curious language. So there's all of these different, it is a skill set and we need to learn it. I oftentimes when I work with companies, like, of course, I always get thrown into like, oh, yeah, you're part of the soft skills track. And then I get to remind people like, it's my soft skills that are really the toughest and are going to help you actually do your technical skills. Without the soft skills, you don't get any of the technical stuff. Like these are human skills that help us navigate what is truly a profoundly difficult time to be human.
Absolutely. Thank you. So I imagine people listening are now, okay, tell us more about this curious language with ourselves and with others. Specifically, what do we do? What do we say?
Yeah. So one of my big things, so this is something, especially as a licensed professional counselor, if in graduate school, we were taught right away, we don't ask people like, why do you feel that way? Right. Like we take the word why out, which it's a language shift and it's difficult. And I love me some Simon Sinek. So yes, know your why, right? Like that's important. This is different. Like, and it dawned on me years ago. I was like, when we were two, it was like, why mom? Why dad? Why? It was all about learning about our world. Why was true curiosity. And then for me, I think it happens around when like 4, because I don't know, 4-year-olds are amazing little creatures. Like they have all of their feelings. The world has not shut them down yet. Right. And they have all their language too by then, usually. And so like all of a sudden this like curious why it flips. And from our parental figures and things like that, we usually get like, why'd you do that? Why are you crying? Right. Like, and all of a sudden it becomes this, it's no longer about curiosity. It's about, I have to defend taking up space. I have to defend why I'm feeling the way I feel. And for me, that's only grown as we're adults. The word why too often is defensive. Like, and so we just shift it. It's a little bit of a language shift. How come? What's this about? Tell me more. Help me understand. How'd you get there? I'd love to hear more about your story, about how you got to this decision, this feeling, this opinion. Because, like, right now, think about there are so many things to have opinions and feelings about, like, so many. And you have every right to feel all of them. And if you want to express all of them all of the time, you can. And at the same time, we were really just not meant to consume as much as we are consuming and have all of these opinions and all of these feelings about all of these really, really, really hard things and all of this real time. What would it be like to pause and seek to understand, especially someone who maybe thinks different than you or feels differently than you or made a different choice than you did? And like, I'm not sure I could ever agree with you on this. And I'd really love to know how you got there. Like, I want to know more about your story because there's a lifetime of stories behind all of our decisions and feelings and opinions. And I guess I want us to get back to seeking to understand how we got to them, to stop trying to change people's minds because I'm not sure it's possible anymore.
Oh, that is so powerful. And I think that, kind of to that last point that you said about kind of changing people's mind, which is not, really possible, of course. We
Or
can
is it even our
influence.
job? Right?
True, true. And I think that when we go in to be curious with some of that kind of need to understand so that we could fix it or so that we could change their point of view and help them to see the way we see the world,
I
then
know.
it's like it's detected by other people. I'm certain of it. And we know that also from research. And it's like, and then they kind of shut down, and it's not really the authentic, vulnerable, courageous conversation that we seek to have. So how do we do this? Like, if I really need somebody to change their mind because I need some result, so yes, I want to be curious, but I got to get them to do something because
Yeah.
maybe they're my employee or my team
Right.
member or my spouse or my kid. So how do I release the attachment to an outcome, which is the essence of true curiosity, when I actually need a result.
Yeah. And this is coming up in so many of my events right now. Like I keep hearing from leaders, especially, I get it. You want me to be empathic, but I just need people to do their dang job. Right. Right. And so there's this element of, do we have, is it possible to hold people accountable, even if maybe they're not going to agree with everything that we agree with? Right. Or like, can we hold people accountable from that space of empathy, which requires some curiosity, because empathy requires us to stay out of judgment, right? Like, and so there's this piece of like, empathy is so powerful. It's connective tissue. It's the salve that we all need, because we all have the inherent need to feel seen, known, loved, and accepted. Empathy is how we do that. Compassion is the action of how we carry it through. But like, there's this element of like, to meet people where they are. It doesn't mean that you have to agree with everything, but you can, to be able to say something like, I can sense and feel and understand that like this is really hard, or you're really struggling, or you may not agree with everything behind what I'm asking. And these are your expectations. This is what I need from you, especially if you are their leader, right? Like, this is what we need for you to do your job well. What does support look like for me to help you get that? And I need you to also know, if we can't get there, here's what happens. Here are consequences. And because like one of the big things I think, especially right now, of how just overwhelmed we all are, like a lot of people, like the workload's too much, right? And so like a leader might not be able to say like, I can't take anything off your plate. Like your expectations, like they are still your expectations. And I know what you're going through is brutal. Your plate is full and it's really hard. And your expectations are still all of this. How can I support you with bandwidth, with emotional support, with a break to refill? Because I can't take anything off your plate, because I think that's the space of a lot of organizations right now. There's so much power though in that connective tissue, and you've seen that they are in struggle, and you've seen that they have a lot, or like they're struggling to give you what you need from them. But then also you still want to clearly state expectations, because we have to stop blaming people for not meeting our expectations, most especially the expectations that we never state out loud. Like, but then you have the really hard part of the other side of that. Sometimes people don't have what you need. And so then we get to have even more courageous conversations, because sometimes they don't have the talent or the gifts or the resources, or they don't want to be coached, or they just don't have what you need, which means you get to wrestle with what that brings up for you, figure out what boundaries you need to set, and how you go find that from somewhere else. Some of that might even include grieving, right? Like that they don't have what you need. The expectation is not met.
Wow. So I sense that this may be bringing up a lot of fear in people, because there's uncertainty, right? So if you open this door, and what if somebody really doesn't have what you need? Or in these days, what if it's easier for them to go somewhere else? So,
Mm.
and of course, on top of it, we've got our own wounds, our own
Yeah.
traumas. And if someone has not been conditioned to be with their emotions, if they hide, reject, suppress them, then being empathetic is downright dangerous. And the body will say, mm-mm, right? Because if I can't be with my own feelings, how can I be with somebody else's? And what if that creates something in me? So, what can you say from your expertise, for those people that want to have these tough, courageous conversations, and yet it is frightening to be with emotions, like, to open those boxes?
Yeah. There's an element when we are avoiding hard conversations, it is almost always about us not managing our own discomfort, right? Or being willing to sit with our own discomfort. So like we we don't talk about it, or and then we hold resentment. And like, and what the data shows us in the Dare to Lead curriculum, the data shows us that if you are going to avoid the tough conversations, especially around fears and feelings, you're going to spend 90% of your time managing the behaviors that are a result of not talking about those things. The unspoken is never benign, ever. It has power. And so we have it. For me, so much of this work, it comes back to self-awareness. Like, own your stuff. Stop trying to stuff it down, plow through it, numb it out. Like, recognize how emotions show up for you. Stop living from the stories that you make up. Stop hurling your hurt onto other people, and be willing to work on your self-awareness skills. You cannot escape this. You cannot escape emotion. You cannot escape yourself. Stop trying to. And some of that is like, I did a TikTok the other day of like, what would it be like to learn how to sit with yourself? And like, I don't think it's not my most viral TikTok by any means, but I just keep getting all these notifications, saved to favorites, saved to favorites. And it's because like for me, I got really, really, really sick until I finally learned the lesson, learn to be and rest and refill and listen to yourself. Stop trying to run. You can't hustle. You can't hustle for this. It will kill you eventually. Like, I do believe that. And I learn how to sit with yourself and wrestle with your emotions, to name them, to expand your emotional vocabulary, recognize how your emotions show up in your body, like physiologically. What are your tells? What's your thinking? What's the first thing you want to do when things get hard? Because those are what make us self-aware, to be aware of those things, so that we stop leaving a wake of hurt behind us and within us, because we're not willing to deal with our own emotional discomfort.
Thank you. And so what I'm kind of getting here is that, yes, in order to have these courageous conversations, we need curiosity. And it's first a curiosity about ourselves. You called it self-awareness, right?
Yes.
Like, first I must
Yes.
be curious, how am I feeling about this situation or this event or this person? And kind of to be with that and to accept that, so that I could present in a more present way with others and actually give myself a chance of being curious. And are there any other, I mean, I love the questions that you gave to us earlier, because it's something that we can apply right away. What other practical tips can you give to people about how to be more curious with themselves and with others?
Well, and I loved how you put that. Like, you got to be curious with yourself, right? There's this element of you. It's really hard to give what you don't have. And so many of these skills that we're asking of people in leadership, but also like the people that we live with and love, like, you want to work on trust and forgiveness and grace and generosity and love and care, curiosity. Are you meeting yourself with all those things first? Because it's really hard to give what you don't have. And and most of us just didn't grow up in homes where we were encouraged to get curious about all that, or to meet ourselves with forgiveness or trust or generosity, love. And the older I get and the more I teach this work and walk it out myself, is I I have to show up for me. I have to stop following through for everyone except myself first, because then I'm going to an empty well looking for water. Stop going to an empty well looking for water, most especially your own. And so, but some of us grew up in homes where like we were taught that to do the work of like self-love, self-awareness, self-forgiveness, and trust and grace, general, all of these things, is self-indulgent or frivolous or and selfish. And I think it's the foundation with which we will be able to love and lead one another well,
Mm.
because we first met ourselves with it.
I agree with you 100%, 100%. And I think that Well, my mind is going right now to a conversation I had right before we started this, and it was someone who is an executive that I had done a training, kind of a retreat with her and a few of the others on the team. And she texted me and she said, "I need some time with you. I'm going through a separation." So I had a few minutes before we did this. So I gave her a call, and she said, I was courageous. I clear about what I need, and I courageously expressed that last week. I said my truth, and now it's led to this.
Yeah.
And so, there was anxiety, there was grief, and there was sadness. We did a
Yes.
little bit of tapping, we kind of released that.
Yeah. Love it.
And the idea here is that there can be a cost
Yeah.
to being courageous to have those tough conversations. And that's a big part of the fear as well, I think, for people, because what if it doesn't work out the way that we want?
I know.
So what do we do about that?
Well, and there's this, I want people to learn how to ask for what they want and need because that is your best shot of getting it, right? It doesn't mean though that someone has it to give or that they want to or are willing to, which means they don't have it. And that comes with a lot of stuff. That comes with grief and self-judgment and um loss. Like, I mean, that comes with a lot. And at least you asked. Because
Yeah.
the alternative is that you abandon yourself. And that resentment that's more destructive than anything because that resentment grows, it becomes toxic. The relationship would have ended anyways, right? Like there's this element though of like when I get clear about who I am, how I show up in the world, what I need and want from other people, the conversations are hard. It goes hand in hand with like there's a concept in this work that we teach like are people doing their best? Will you choose to believe that people are doing their best even if they choose not to give you what you want and need, even if they don't have it? For me, it's their best. I don't believe that people are malicious. I really don't. Sometimes they just don't have what we need, and we got to wrestle with it and go find what we need somewhere else. And like, and that's really tough with family, spouses, but it's also really tough with leadership, right? And like in our organizations. That I wrote it in my first book ever, Upper, like stop going to an empty well looking for water. It is okay to love people from afar sometimes because like I also don't want to be the person that stops going to the well because I do believe people can learn and grow and change. If I didn't believe that, I'd go do something else for a living. I go to the well though, like for the flowers and the sun and the smell of fresh grass. Because then one day, if there is water in the well, I'll actually be able to receive it because I learned how to love that person or lead that person within the boundaries. And I won't have been so resentful because I was going to a well looking for water where there was no water. Sometimes people don't have what we need and that's, we can still choose to believe that people are doing their best and know that sometimes their best isn't awesome. It's not good enough for us. So that's when you get to continue to set boundaries and ask for what you want and need. And I think that's the therapeutic side of me. Like I love me some boundaries and I wish people would be more boundaried. like I get that feedback as a facilitator all the time, right? Like I just had a Vistage share, like my team was like, they want to know if you want to stay for lunch. And I was like, can you let them know that I have a very full speaking week that week and it will literally be a last minute call of how I feel. Like I can't say yes to all of that because my body has some limitations, my bandwidth has limitations. And so like, and I will live boundaried so that I can show up fully when I say yes.
That is very powerful. And so I would love for you to share with us some guidance as to how to do that. What is best practice in terms of setting expectations, expressing those expectations, requesting that they be honored, accountability, all of that? Like, what do we need to know to do it with the most grace and with the best results?
I really I think the biggest piece, especially when you start asking for what you want and need, stating clear expectations, setting boundaries, I think the biggest barrier to that for so many people is our own discomfort. Like we don't want to disappoint people. We get tripped up on what we think that they're thinking about us, right? Like all of these, like we like, well, oh my God, they're just gonna think this about me. And like, except like I'm the one that has to be in this body every day. I want to be able to sleep at night. I want to be able to look in the mirror. I want to be able to show up and serve fully. And I know what's best to do that. And so I have to state those boundaries clearly for anyone to be able to respect them. And one of the things that people always, I love asking this question in my trainings, like, so if you set a boundary or a clear expectation and it is not met or it's outright violated, what happens? Does your boundary change? And it never fails. Most of the room will be like, yeah. And I was like, no, your relationship changes. Like, and depending on the level of trust in the relationship, yeah, maybe you get to navigate that boundary in a little bit different way. Boundaries are important. If someone is upset about an expectation that you have set or a boundary that you've set, it's pretty likely that it's because they've benefited from you not having that boundary, right? Which is hard. And they are, I mean, this is where you get really into like, you can get into like the matrix, right? Like they're allowed to have their feelings hurt, they're allowed to like express those, like all of like, but we're going to stay curious and we're going to rumble it out, especially because we want to be in relationship with people. And so, but like we have to navigate what's it look like then if you can't respect my boundary. Prentice Hempel has my absolutely favorite quote on boundaries. Their quote on boundaries, and probably get it a little bit out of order, but boundaries are the space where I can simultaneously love you and me.
Wow.
And I put the word lead in there too. Boundaries are the space where I can simultaneously love and lead you and me, right? Like I that is that's it.
Thank you. And what if my boundaries are different than the other person's boundaries? So they too would like just as much to express their truth and their boundaries. What do we do about that?
We get to stay in the rumble and wrestle it out with someone, and hopefully hopefully that relationship has trust and true connection. And like because there's this element like, and I've been in a pretty big health journey the last 2.5 years, and so like, I've had to say no more than I've ever said no. Like I don't check in with my friends as much as I've checked in with them. I can't go to your party. I have a speaking engagement the next day. Like I have to manage as much of my pain as I can, right? Like, and so like I have disappointed a lot of people. I've yelled at my husband, Chad, more than I ever have, right? Like in the last 2.5 years because I've been fighting to stay alive. And so there's a lot of disappointments and hurt there. And when we choose to walk with people and we choose the humanity and love, like it's me being able to say to my friend Sam, like, I know like you're super disappointed, but like I can't come to that event. I I have an engagement the next day and like my life isn't set up like that anymore. Like and like I love you and I know this is hard and we get to rumble that out and she gets to have disappointment and feelings about it and how much I've changed or our friendship has changed because of the last 2.5 years. And these are my boundaries so that I can be okay. And so like there's room for all of it. That like that goes back to the and like there's room for my boundaries, her hurt, our love, our friendship, clear expectation. There's room for all of that. It's messy and it's uncomfortable, which back to the beginning, our brain doesn't love. And that's this human experience. It's kind of what makes it beautiful too.
Yeah, it's first of all, I wish you all the best with your health.
Thank you. We're getting there. We're getting there. Like healing is, we all got to heal at some point, right? On all levels.
Very true. And when we can be curious with ourselves, right? Notice what we're feeling, accept where we are, love where we are, um, detach from outcomes to the best of our abilities, then we tend to heal more quickly. And it's very fascinating
Yes.
that the same thing goes for our external relationships. When we can give that to others as well, the relationships can heal. And so,
So true.
from the work, if you don't mind, that you do on helping people to embrace these curious conversations, what are some of the biggest difficulties that people can expect, and what can they do to kind of soften that?
Yeah. I it's funny when people start to walk out this work, courage is contagious. So people will start to notice, right? They may not be able to name what's different. They'll probably want it though. Um, because they feel more seen when you choose to lean into curiosity, choose the courage, skill set, and live as your whole self, because that forges connection with other people. And so and at the same time, people will absolutely question it and be skeptical and be like, what did you do? Like, what are you talking about? You kind of sound like a new, like, this is new language, right? And so, like, I, your strongest tool in the toolbox is to model it. You stay the course, and you keep navigating it. It is not perfection. I screw this up every day, and I teach this work, and I've been living it out for a really long time. And I learn something new every day, and I screw it up every day, probably. And like, we own it, you circle back, you make it right, and you begin again, because courage is sometimes beginning again a million times in one day. But it's navigating that piece. It's to remember that you deserve to be seen fully, and the world is in desperate need of seeing you, and that requires you to fully show up.
If I may add to that, to your point in this conversation, it's remembering that everybody else too deserves to be seen and
Yes.
heard and validated and accepted and respected,
Yes.
even if we might not agree with everything. We must respect that that is their world and
Right.
their feelings.
Right.
And I love that we started with kind of like we need to do our own work because we do have emotions and
Yep.
they can run the show. And we do have this brain that wants to keep us alive and safe. And so it is a constant kind of game of checking in with ourselves, giving ourselves that compassion and, showing up fully.
Yep.
So if we were
Exactly.
to loop back to the butterflies now,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
how does this now connect even more with these beautiful little souls? What have they
Mhm.
taught you that has helped you in this journey?
There's this the butterfly has all of the cells that it needs from the moment it's laid in its tiny little egg to become the monarch, or to become the butterfly. And so, like, we have what we need. Like, it's there. It's just, we need help and love and support to get there, right? Like, and one of my favorite metaphors, so, and it's kind of gross, which makes it even better, because like nature is kind of gross. But like, so caterpillars, they molt, which basically just means they crawl out of their old skin to get bigger. So they molt 4 or 5 times in their, like, monarchs are 2 weeks in their caterpillar stage. And so, like, they literally have to grow out of their old skin. They have to rest before they do it, because it takes so much effort to grow out of their old skin. And then the wildest part, they turn around and they eat it. You can't run from your past. You can't get rid of it. You get to choose whether or not you are going to heal from it and make it work for you. do the work, do that work. Like you are worthy of that work. Like all of the hard stuff that I've been through, and there's been a lot of it. Like I wouldn't wish it on anyone. And I would never want to go through it again. And I wouldn't let you take it from me for anything. Because life is both. Life is the really hard yuck and the gifts.
And just like the butterflies, you are modeling that and creating this beautiful
Yep.
ripple effect in our
Yep.
world of self-acceptance and courage and curiosity,
Yep. Yep. And the other part,
compassion.
like the other piece for butterflies, like when they go into their chrysalis, they become like literally completely undone, like a soupy goo of cells. Like they have to become undone in order for all of the parts to form into the wings and the body, and then they just get to rest in there until they're ready to come out. Like the undone is typically where we will find the flight. It's so corny, but it's so true. Like I just like love it so much.
And it takes so much courage and
It
so much
does. It does. It takes a
of our
lot of
own truth.
surrender and trust and a ton of courage.
Yeah. Well, I just am sending loads of love your way
Thank
for the
you.
important and loving work that you do. And how can people learn more about how to engage with you, bring you into their
Yeah.
organizations?
So I'm pretty easy to find with such a weird name. So I always tell people like, no, you find me on social media, right? Like, so my website's justinefroelker.com. I have a newsletter there. There's, also email me through there. And then I share this work on a pretty daily basis on all the different platforms. So I always tell people like pick your favorite platform. If you go with Instagram, you'll get a little bit more puppies and butterflies, but make no doubt I can turn a butterfly and a puppy video into a courage teach for LinkedIn in a second. Like, because there really is kind of a lesson in everything. So, and I TikTok, I'm on all of them, but like I usually share some like a version of the same teach on all of them. But like, I always warn people too, like when you follow me, I don't compartmentalize myself. Like I, because I think I think that's part of our problem. We're just like consuming people that look like us, believe like us, think like us, or like they only share one thing. And it's like, no, we're whole human beings. Like, so I'll tell people on Instagram, I'll be like, I'm going to talk about some weird health stuff. So if it's not your jam, just scroll on by. Like, just keep clicking. You're good, right? Like, if you're only here for the butterflies, like, and then I'll joke, I'll be like, end of health talk. Like,
And it is that courage of the end, right? I am all these things and all these feelings and all these thoughts. And the essence of who I am is that compassionate, curious,
yes.
true self.
Yep. That's it. That's it.
Well,
Thank you.
thank you. Thank you
You're
once
welcome. Thank you for having me.